This is Dr. Charles Parker, and you're listening to Core Brain Journal. It's a place where I connect both fresh discoveries and interesting different perspectives from advanced mind science with the realities of real people and everyday life down on Main Street. Welcome to Core Brain Journal one more time, and we have the absolutely deepest and most profound and yet wonderfully, reasonably authentic guy that we've talked to in the entire time we've been doing these recordings. He is a yoga master, a deep spiritual master, actually trained in India. Leonard Perlmutter is joining us. Welcome, Leonard.
Thank you very much, Chuck. Appreciate it.
So I'm going to do a formal introduction in just a moment, but first, a brief word from those folks who are sponsoring us here. First of all, you listeners already know how much we love the reality of data here at CBJ. And today we welcome again our clinical friend and our new sponsor partner, Direct Health Access Laboratory. With over 3 million studies, they are deep leaders of experience with a big picture of measuring, for example, methylation, cryptopyrrole, and copper challenges that can give you, get this, a personality disorder, anywhere from a personality disorder to psychosis. They provide global service with a molecular focus. Stay tuned, more about them later. And then you already also know that we love the reality of hard data from the point of view of clinical friends who know more how to do the work with adolescents and children. And we're pleased to welcome the sponsor and partner with a deep interest in fresh options to address the complexity of adolescent treatment failure nationally and internationally. For 80 years, the nonprofit Barry Robinson Center teams in Norfolk, Virginia, have provided residential care on an evolved, family, interpersonal, and yet global level. We'll talk more about them in just a second. So thanks for listening on that. Now let me introduce Leonard to you here. He is a very deep guy. We don't have enough time to talk about how interesting and how multidimensional this gentleman is. I'm just going to do a brief and then we'll talk about him. So Leonard Perlmutter is one of the Western world's leading pioneers in the introduction of meditation into the cultural firmament, having founded the American Meditation Institute, AMI, in Averill Park, New York in 1996. AMI's courses are now approved and accredited by the American Medical Association and the American Nurses Association. Leonard also serves as the author and editor of Transformation, the Journal of Meditation as Mind-Body Medicine. You know, we talk about transformational activities all the time here at Core Brain Journal, so you're going to fit right in, Leonard. However, today we're here to talk about his seminal new book, The Heart and Science of Yoga, the American Meditation Institute's empowering self-care program for a happy, healthy, and joyful life. I'm looking forward to hearing about it. It's an encyclopedic guide to meditation and the yoga science that lies right behind the practice of meditation. This book has been praised by such popular medical luminaries as Dr. Dean Ornish, Dr. Oz, and Larry Dossey as a highly regarded, most accessible source of knowledge about adapting the 8 steps of yoga science, including meditation, into a busy and stress-filled life so you can reach a new level of peace, contentment, well-being, and achievement. Now, that's going to be a very interesting topic. So, Leonard, thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it. And our audience is all ears on this one because many, many people who are listening to us are so eager to hear some basic things about what is meditation, how can it take you where you want to go, and really how to begin the practice, what the meaning of it is and how it works. So, Leonard, why don't you start wherever you want to? It's a big, big topic. Start by telling us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing now, please, if you don't mind.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Yoga, I think, is a little misunderstood in our culture. When we hear the word yoga, a concept comes forward from the unconscious mind, and most of us think about physical exercises, physical postures. And that is certainly part of yoga science. But the science of yoga is much broader. It includes the physical postures, but it really is the oldest form of mind-body medicine in the world. So there's a hypothesis that it presents. The hypothesis is that in order to experience happiness and health and security that we all desire, we need a philosophical and a scientific template for seeking, discovering, and employing the truth. And to begin that practice, a person must first be willing to use his or her own mind-body-sense complex as their own personal laboratory in which to undertake scientific experiments. Then in the midst of every relationship, something called the bridge of yoga is to be employed. Remember, yoga means union, and the bridge of yoga is a metaphoric bridge that inspires and instructs us to connect our outer action with our inner wisdom. When we talk about outer action in yoga science, we're not just talking about physical action, we're talking about verbal action and even thinking, because even a thought is a veritable action. And so the hypothesis that is set forth by yoga science says that the more frequently we can base our thoughts, words, and actions on our own inner intuitive wisdom, the consequence that flows, and we know every time we take an action, a consequence develops. That became Newton's third law of motion. The more that we base our thoughts, words, and deeds on our own inner intuitive wisdom, the consequence will enable us to fulfill the purpose of our lives without pain, misery, or bondage. At the same time, the corollary to this hypothesis is also tested. When we do not use the bridge of yoga, when we do not have a philosophy of life, no matter what you call it, and you don't have to call it the bridge of yoga, you could call it the bridge of Christianity, or the bridge of Judaism, the bridge of Buddhism, or Hinduism, or Islam, or any of the Native American cultures, or you can come up with your own name. But we need a philosophy of life. Every human being needs a philosophy of life. And the corollary to that hypothesis is that if we don't have a philosophy of life, and instead our actions, thoughts, words, and deeds actually conflict with our inner wisdom, then instead of experiencing happiness, health, and security, we experience increasing amounts of dis-ease, pain, and stress.
So well said. I'm actually mesmerized by what you're talking about already. So you're saying it so articulately, and I really haven't thought about that dichotomy of internal self-expression. I mean, I've thought about it. We've all applied it. But yeah, please.
Let me ask you to participate in a yoga science experiment.
Okay.
That will, and I invite all the listeners to participate as well. It's a very simple yoga practice. Actually, every practice has to be easy in order to be right. If it's right, it'll be easy for where we are at right now. So this yoga science experiment has a part A and a part B. So let's do part A first. I'm going to ask you to take your right hand and raise it directly over your head and then bring it back down again. Go ahead. Were you able to do that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you know it's possible, right? It is doable.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now let's do part B of the experiment. I'd like you to do the exact same thing you just did. I'm going to ask you in a moment to raise your right hand up over your head and bring it back down. But this time, I want you to do it without any thinking. In other words, raise your right hand, bring it up, and then bring it down without entertaining any thoughts whatsoever. And see if you can do that. I bet you can't do it.
I was working on it. I think intentionality.
Really hard to do it. Right?
Intentionality is a problem, Leonard. I mean, no question about it. The first time I did it, I was like, okay, he's going to ask me about my breathing, because I wasn't aware of the fact that when I went up and brought it back down, I exhaled. I was just thinking, because it was a natural thing for the arm to go up and down with an exhalation on the downside. So I thought, he's going to say something about breathing, because that's so completely obvious. And then you were saying, don't think about it. And I was like, okay. And Leonard, I've done a lot of meditation, and it's interesting, because I did Zen meditation for many years. I don't meditate now. I really should. But the issue is I did yoga and meditation for many years. And the idea of having a clean mind is something I've practiced at, but I did not do it on this occasion. I can tell you, that's why I was laughing, because it was like, okay, here we are in the middle of, technology and interview with a very interesting guy, but I've got to turn my mind off, and now it was impossible.
Well, so we learned something very important, and that is that the mind moves first and the body follows. The body will not move and will not bring about a consequence unless and until there's a movement in the mind. So this is the basic difference between Western and Eastern philosophy. In the West, we start with the gross, our mind-body-sense complex, and we believe that our happiness and our health and our security lies outside of us. So in the West, we concentrate on the gross, the grosser, and the grossest in search of happiness, health, and security. But in the East, quote unquote, and this is not a geographical point, this is a philosophical point, Eastern philosophy starts with the gross, the mind-body-sense complex, but recognizes that the answer lies within, because the body cannot move unless and until there's a movement in the mind. So in meditation and yoga science, we start with the gross, then we go to the subtle. Then we go to the subtler and the subtlest. So everything moves from the subtle to the gross. That's the way reality presents itself.
So let me take a moment, point of clarification. Sorry to interrupt, Leonard, for just a second. So let's get gross down for me and for our listeners. Gross is really the perceptual apparatus in action. I'm guessing.
That's right. The brain and the senses in cooperation and coordination with the body.
So then grosser is moving more in that direction of sensuality and thinking what you're doing, and grossest, you've jumped off the bridge. You're into not knowing what you're doing, and you're just doing it.
Well, it's that evolutionary process of going outside of ourselves for happiness, health, and security. So I see separate objects. There seems to be an infinite number of objects and relationships in the universe. Some might make me happy, and some might make me sad. Some might make me healthy, some might make me unhealthy. So I have to examine, I have to control, I have to manipulate, I have to obliterate in order to be happy and healthy and secure. So it's really playing with the different players on the chessboard.
The outer world.
The outer world.
As opposed to the inner world. You're running around finding one's, attempting to find a realization without transformation, just manipulating the world.
That's right. And so what happens in those cases is that the four functions of the mind are not all used. The four functions of the mind are the ego, the something called the manas, which is sort of an importer and an exporter, and engages the senses. So we have the ego, we have the senses, and we have the unconscious mind. But when we are continuously going out into the material world at 100 miles an hour in the passing lane of life, multitasking, which is impossible for this mind-body-sense complex to accomplish. Mm-hmm. So in order to provide us the delusion that we're multitasking, adrenaline has to surge through the body, and that depresses my immune system. It also depresses my mind, and so it really makes it very difficult for me to see the world as it truly is. So instead, my perception is skewed by my conception. Just like you had the conception that the experiment was going to be about the breath.
Yeah,
so you were anticipating that.
Mm-hmm.
So we see what we know.
Yeah.
It's there's a marvelous little story about three umpires. They're having a dinner, and they're having a discussion about balls and strikes. What determines a ball and what determines a strike? And the first umpire, who's a rookie, says, "I call him as I see him." And the second umpire, who has been calling balls and strikes in the major leagues for about 10 years, says, "I call them as they are." And the third fellow, who's been calling balls and strikes for about 25 years, he's an old pro. He looks at the other two, shaking his head, and he says, "They are what I call them."
That's fantastic. That's great. Isn't that so true of what's going on in mind science? I mean, it's unbelievable.
Right. So the mind is the problem, because we have all these faulty concepts. I mean, I know that I learned in grade school that 1 plus 2 is 3. But I have to be honest, I also had different teachers that taught me that 1 plus 2 is 4. And I was so naive and so vulnerable at that time, I stored that incorrect, untrue concept in my unconscious mind. And don't you know, when I'm in certain kinds of situations, a lot of times it's with family or work colleague, where my emotional buttons are pushed, that becomes my go-to concept, that 1 plus 2 is 4. And every time I use it and employ it, I hurt myself.
Well, probably under that moment of pressure, 1 plus 2 does equal 4.
A lot of pressure.
That's very interesting. Thank you. Sorry.
So yoga science changes all that because it introduces us on a very deep and meaningful level to the fourth function of the mind. Beyond the ego, beyond the senses, and beyond the unconscious mind is our conscience. That in Sanskrit is buddhi. The conscience, which also in Christianity was referred to as the Holy Ghost or the Holy Spirit. The point is this, that only the human being has a conscience. We are the only animal that has a conscience. And the conscience acts as a mirror. That's its functionality. It reflects. And what the conscience can reflect is perfect wisdom from a portion of the mind that lies beyond the conscious. It lies beyond the unconscious. It's referred to in yoga science as the superconscious portion of the mind. Now that's not just poetry. It's the same portion of the mind where Albert Einstein saw mathematical equations. It's the same portion of the mind where Paul McCartney hears beautiful melodies. Chuck, it doesn't mean that you're going to become a songwriter, right? And it doesn't mean that I'm going to become a mathematician or a physicist. What it does mean is that if we can employ our conscience to determine the thought to think, the word to speak, and the action to take, and if I can actually base my outer actions on my own inner wisdom reflected by the buddhi, the consequence will always lead me for my highest and greatest good.
Extremely heavy.
In the process, we can change the software of the mind. I can sacrifice those faulty concepts, 1 plus 2 equals 4, and the channel from which they come will become shallower and shallower and shallower. So meditation is an engineering science. Every time we sit and we meditate, and throughout the day when we do meditation in action, employing the bridge of yoga to base outer action on inner wisdom, we are re-engineering the software of the mind. And as you probably know, unconscious thoughts are 1,000,000 times more powerful than good intentions. So the only way that we can change them is to get hold of the record button and re-record some truthful concepts. And that's what meditation and yoga science helps us to do.
That is so well said. I mean, it's in a way paralytic when you say that, because you just have a way of saying it and conceptualizing as you walk down that path with you. We're walking down arm in arm in some woods here, and the light just comes on in a certain way. The way you say it is very interesting, and I really appreciate it. I read Autobiography of Yogi a long time ago, Paramahansa Yogananda, and it was many, many years ago. My father had a copy sitting around. I mean, from really right after World War II, or somewhere in there, he got a hold of the book, and then I read it later on in my life, and it was interesting because a lot of that book is about the superconscious.
Yeah.
And they didn't call it that at that time, but it had to do with connecting with the more universal truths that really work on a more universal level rather than our limited vision of what our surround is and what our even our relationship experience is.
Yes. So what that tells us through our meditation practice is that we are simultaneously citizens of two worlds. Clearly, we're a citizen of the material world. We have a body, mind, sense complex, and yet we are something other. We are pure consciousness, wisdom, and bliss, having a human experience through this mind-body sense complex. And the key to successful living is to unite these two worlds. We do that by employing our conscience, the buddhi. We're asked in every relationship, and every relationship means the same thing, doesn't it? It means that I have to take an action. I have to speak a word. I have to think a thought. And all of those are going to bring about a consequence that can lead me toward the happiness and the health and the security that I deeply desire, or will delay the prospect, and instead I'll experience physical, mental, emotional, spiritual dis-ease or pain. And if I don't heed the lesson of pain at a low decibel level, the decibel level just gets louder and louder and louder. So yoga science says, heed the lesson of pain at a low decibel level and make a mid-course correction. One of the most inspiring yogic images that I have seared in my awareness is my own depiction of Neil Armstrong flying that lunar module to the surface of the moon. We want him to have a soft, safe landing, don't we? Mm-hmm. And what's actually happening as Armstrong is at the controls? Well, there's all these onboard computers that are sending all sorts of telemetry back to Houston, to the Space Center. And they're running all this instantaneously, it seems, all this new information from the lunar module through these huge supercomputers, and then radio transmitting it back to the lunar module to instruct Armstrong to fire a retro rocket, 0.2 seconds, fire another retro rocket for 1 complete second, and so on and so forth, so that he can have a soft landing. That's what the conscience does for us. It is constantly bringing in telemetry about the world, and what's to be done and what's not to be done, when it's to be done and when it's not to be done. And if we cut ourselves off from that core of our personality that is all-knowing, this intuitive library of wisdom, then we're stuck with what we refer to as lower knowledge. Lower knowledge is obtained through the process of reasoning and contact with the mind and the senses with the objects of the world. The lower knowledge, it's very attractive. It's received indirectly as hearsay from outside sources, such as this conversation right now. I'm not asking anybody to believe me, you see, because right now it's just in the form of hearsay. Mm-hmm. If you're interested, experiment in your own laboratory and know the truth yourself. But lower knowledge comes from lectures, books, TV, the internet, Google. And lower knowledge includes philosophy, medicine, commerce, technology, the arts, and all the sciences, including political science, international relationships. Higher knowledge, on the other hand, is considered to be the highest form of knowledge. It represents the changeless, eternal truth that lies beyond the relativity of the senses, beyond the relativity of the conscious mind, beyond the relativity of the unconscious mind. The higher knowledge is always healing, always creatively supported in every relationship. But without the guidance of higher knowledge, lower knowledge inevitably leads to pain and destruction. And that's why Albert Einstein says, and this is very inspiring to me, he's speaking as a yoga scientist, he says that a problem cannot be solved on the level at which it appears. You can't just keep on moving the chess pieces and expect a different result. A problem cannot be solved on the level at which it appears. It must be solved on a higher level. We have to use the mind, using the conscious, to go beyond the mind into the superconscious wisdom, and then bring that superconscious wisdom back into the conscious mind, bring it back into the matrix, and use it in mind, action, and speech. And who knows where it's going to lead. But the promise is, it's always going to lead to the summum bonum of life.
Well, that inner world could help a person synchronize more effectively with the outer world. I think what happens, as a psychiatrist and an individual interested in cognitive activity and looking so much at, for example, attention deficit disorder, and the one most frequently missed subsets of executive function challenges has to do with unmanageable cognitive abundance, just thinking too much. And, I was just, because it's not even in the book, but it's the main presentation of a symptom where their executive control is gone because they have a suffusion of brain spaghetti because they're just thinking so much and they don't have a place to put it. They don't have an internal source to play a peg to hang their hat on because the awareness process is so completely fixated on all the external details. And as you were talking, I was thinking about how, and people who are in the business know that meditation and mindfulness is certainly, one of the people we've interviewed is a very interesting pediatrician who talked about mindful practice with adults who work with children with ADHD, and how mindful awareness, a deeper awareness of they didn't say it this way, of the elemental truths, can then put them behind all the distractions. And as you're talking, I'm thinking of all the hundreds of people I've seen with this affliction of thinking too much, and how, yes, we were able to give them successfully some medications and so on, but the actual healing process is much deeper than that. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on board and sharing this, because this is such a meaningful conversation to so many people who haven't had a chance to actually have any kind of a working relationship with an individual who is so articulate and deep and experienced as you are, with that connection with a person's life in reality and their own inner world. I really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate it as well. I tell people all the time that thinking really is overrated. And we know all about the vagaries of junk food, and we're quite on guard about having too much junk food. But we don't even think about all the junk thoughts we think during the day. And I know that in the culture there's a new phrase out there that has caused a lot of tumult in the culture, and the phrase is one that's called extreme vetting. And some people say, we need extreme vetting because otherwise there can't be peace on the chessboard. And others say, no, too much extreme vetting will cause more problems on the chessboard. And so, you see, the extreme vetting on the chessboard does no good whatsoever. what we really need, we need extreme vetting in the mind. Every thought that comes into our awareness is only a suggestion of what to give our attention to. And if we give it our attention, it's going to birth a word. And if we give it more attention, it's going to birth an action. And all of those are going to bring about consequences. So that thought that's in my awareness, what am I going to do with it? If I'm driving the automobile down the highway at 55 or 65 miles an hour, and someone driving about 80, 90 miles an hour cuts right in front of me, forcing me to slam on the brake, allowing a bubble from my unconscious mind to come into my conscious mind, and I am aware of anger. What am I going to do with that new relationship? The more attention I give it, all sorts of a cascade of hormones poisons my internal physiology. If I repress that anger, I'm going to become neurotic and I'm going to be in even more pain. But actually, this fellow that cuts me off in traffic has just done me a monumental benefit. It has facilitated the movement of an unconscious force that previously I was not even aware of. And yet it was manipulating the strings of this marionette called Leonard. Right? Yep. I would think, I would speak, and I would act based on that anger that's stored in my unconscious mind, and I was clueless. Okay? So this fellow cuts me off in traffic. Now I have a conscious relationship with the anger. What am I going to do with it? I'm not going to serve it. I'm going to be in pain. I'm not going to repress it. I'm going to become neurotic. I'm going to be in more pain. But it's an opportunity to sacrifice it. Sacrificing it is a mechanism for transformation, because what is anger? It's just energy, isn't it? No doubt it's a contracted form of energy. Yeah. It's a debilitating form of energy, but it's energy nonetheless. And what do we know about energy from 5th grade? Well, it can't be created and it can't be destroyed, but it can be transformed. I know from my own personal experimentation in 5th grade science class that ice can be melted into water, and water can be heated into steam. And anger can be transformed. The debilitating power of anger can be transformed through sacrifice into strategic reserves of a positive healing energy, an increase in my willpower, and an expansion of my creativity. But right now, everything I'm saying is just hearsay. You won't know it's true unless you are in a situation where somebody cuts you off in traffic, or somebody doesn't do what you want them to do, and you're aware of anger. And then what are you going to do with it? If you can experiment with it and base your outer actions on your inner wisdom and sacrifice it instead of serve it, I'm saying you'll experience a truth. And you'll feel better, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. That's what happened to me.
And you'll have a transformational moment. Now, this is such an interesting conversation. I hate to take a break right now, but it's a time for us to take a break. And coming back, I want to take that moment that you just shared with us, and I want to take it back to your own personal learning experience, if you don't mind, because part of the introduction that I didn't read about Leonard was his training with the International Himalayan Yoga Teachers Association. He was there. He worked with the Himalayan Yoga Teachers Association, but has studied with Swami Rama in the Himalayas. And I would love to hear about that experience, when you did it, what your age was, how you went into it, how you came out of it, what that experience was all about. So let's take a moment for a break. We'll be right back, folks, and hear what Leonard talks about with his transformational moments in India. Well, folks, you know as well as I do that psychiatric treatment failure, especially after multiple medication trials and those very, very brief hospitalizations, may prove insufficient to deal at home with the complexity of troubled children and those adolescents from 6 to 17 years old. Improved care, those next mandatory steps, should include a more comprehensive approach to address those multiple levels of challenges, from family to peers to school, diagnostically from defiance to depression, on every level. For families including military families internationally. The Barry Robinson Center's 32-acre open college-like campus in Norfolk, Virginia, provides safety and security and clean, comfortable living. How do we know? We refer folks over there all the time, strongly endorse what they're doing. So for further information, an informed interview, connect at this page, barryrobinson.org/core. Well, you folks already know that here at Core Brain Journal, we're on a mission to introduce you to resources that make significant contributions to the investigation of those predictable mind science applications. Our colleagues at DHA Lab Group provide a real difference with treatment options for people at every level, from first awareness of mind problems to those frustrating times when even well-informed treatment becomes surprisingly unpredictable. For my entire professional life, from psychoanalysis to brain scans, I've searched for, yes, improved predictability. The good news for all of us, from professionals to patients, remarkably effective research offers useful, cost-effective, organic options far beyond guesswork with psychiatric medications alone. DHA lab tests measure unbalanced biomedical details through easily available testing, now available globally for a variety of molecular answers from, for example, methylation, copper, and cryptopyrrole challenges. Check in for more details at dhalab.com core. That's dhalab.com/core. Well, Leonard, I am here to confess to you, I am so interested in I'm so interested in the conversation itself, but I am deeply curious about your own transformational experience. You're so real and so authentic in the way you present the material, and with such great concrete examples of that process. I mean, it's really a process. And I think what you're saying so frequently is it has to do not only with context, but with time. I mean, the issue of context with the person speeding at 80 miles an hour, that's a reality. But the issue of practice and working and slowly but surely withdrawing from the tendency to feel that you can connect and manipulate that reality and really rising beyond it. I don't like the concept necessarily of being above it, although transcendence has a certain measure of looking down on the passing scene. But I think just being beyond it is an important part of it. So, Leonard, please tell us about what drove you as a young man to start thinking about meditative practice in your experience in India, please.
Well, even as a child, I was very philosophically oriented. It was just the way that I was most comfortable in the world. And as a young child, grade school, and then in high school, I was attracted to the Scouts. I became a Cub Scout. I became a Boy Scout. And I really enjoyed my time in Scouting. It was a great way to learn practical skills. Mm-hmm. If you might remember, the motto of Scouting was be prepared. Mm-hmm. Well, be prepared for what? Well, be prepared for anything, because you never know what life is going to throw, right?
Yeah.
And so it was very practical, and I enjoyed that very much. Later on in life, as I was looking for meaning in my life, I began to study scriptures and philosophy from the world's great religions. And that led me to yoga science. And the study and the reading of yoga science led me to discover a teacher by the name of Swami Rama of the Himalayas. And I had a voracious appetite for reading his books. Why? Because the way he taught, it reminded me of the way I studied in Scouting. So he presented himself more like a scoutmaster. Here is this practice, Leonard. If you do this in the midst of certain relationships, you'll experience a truth. And you will feel better, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And so that's exactly what I did. For the first 13 years of studying the written teachings of Swami Rama, I never met him. In fact, I felt that I had a healthy allergy to gurus. I was not going to allow anybody to tell me what to do.
You're a skeptic.
I am a skeptic. But that's good. I think that's very valuable.
Yeah.
I'm in favor of that.
I'm with you.
I think that there's a place there, because I think a scientific mind needs to doubt. And yet, and the more that I practiced, the more that I experienced the truth, and the better I felt. I felt better physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And at a certain point, I began questioning whether all the changes in my life were necessary. You see, I began to prune different relationships away from my life that were based on fear. I can remember years ago, I was in California, and I met Eknath Ishwaran, who had a meditation school of meditation in Petaluma, California. I met him through a woman who I went to high school with, and she was out in California, and we went to visit. And I said to Ishwaran at the time, I said, I love this teaching, but I'm an art dealer, and in fact, even today, that's how I support myself. My wife is an artist, and I'm an art dealer, and that's how we make a living. I tell you, there's not much money in teaching meditation classes, but that's my passion, that's my love. So I said to Ishwaran, I'm self-employed. I'm an art dealer, and to be very frank, I have to deal with a lot of fear, because even though I have bills coming in every day, I don't sell paintings every day. I don't sell paintings every week. Sometimes I don't sell paintings every month. It might be 3 or 4 months between sales. So I have to deal with a lot of fear. I said, I think that this is, of course, a wonderful philosophy and very practical, but perhaps it's better suited for people who work for the government, I told him. I said, gee, if you work for the government, you have a guaranteed paycheck coming in all the time. You probably have health insurance and a nice pension. Then you can practice meditation and yoga science. And he looked at me, and I can still see the twinkle in his eye. He looked at me with a little smile and a loving paternal look on his countenance, and he said, Leonard, your problem is you think you're self-employed. He said, I'm employed by the self. And a light goes on in my head.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
I said to myself, hey, I can become employed by the self. I can base my outer actions on inner wisdom. That's what I'm trying to do. And the more that I base my outer actions on my inner wisdom, following that teaching, I was able to transform the fear. It wasn't a bad thing that I had the fear. It was my creative energy in an improper form. It was potentially debilitating, but it actually turned out to be a resource because I was able to sacrifice it. So similarly, if I gave you 20 gallons of crude oil from Saudi Arabia and I put it into your automobile, you'd be very upset. Why? Because it would wreck your engine.
Yep.
Oh, it just so happens that crude oil doesn't work in a combustion engine. But I wouldn't do that. What I would do is I would send it down to Texas to a refinery. I know they have the technology to transform crude oil into gasoline. And then I would bring it back in the form of gasoline and put it into your automobile, and you'd be very happy. Drive around for 300 or 400 miles. So in relationships, what comes forward from the unconscious mind are contractive and debilitating forms of our creative energy. I'm talking about fear, anger, selfish desires. And they are looking to be transformed so that they can help us as opposed to continue to hinder us.
Great analogy. I'm thinking about that, and that was such a interesting expression that he had. Just depends on who's running the show.
So my concept in my unconscious mind that 1 + 2 is 4 is that I was self-employed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You see, I bought that.
Yeah.
And I thought myself to be self-employed, and I suffered because of it. I was in pain because of it. Mm-hmm. I had stomach cramps because of it. You see, it caused cramps in my stomach because I was afraid that I wouldn't have the money. Mm-hmm. But if I were employed by the self and began to willingly base my outer action on my inner wisdom, the inner wisdom of my higher self, then I could transform the power of fear. I could become more creative. I could become a better art dealer, and I could make a living.
Well, now I have two questions that come to mind. So you were working with the gentleman in California, and you were very likely meditating with him, and he was a, pardon the French, guru for you, a person who was helping you understand the larger picture of the possibilities in your life. And so there are two questions. One is, what was the meditation practice? Because I'm very interested in that. Having been a person who's done Zen meditation for a long period of time, I read Zen for years and was deeply into it and practiced the martial arts in the relationship of Zen and all that sort of thing. So, and then the second question is, what in that process sent you to India to then have that next level experience in India?
Well, coincidental to my journey to California, my primary teacher had always been Swami Rama, although I had never met him. Mm-hmm. But in 1991, as I had started to talk about, myself and my wife began pruning relationships, business relationships, personal relationships from our lives because of things that had been in our lives because of fear. We were afraid to let go of them. And we contacted Swami Rama. That was the first time that we contacted him just to ask him one simple question, because we really already had our meditation practice that I had learned from his books. Mm-hmm. So I was deep into it, but I finally needed to reach out to him as somebody I trusted, because my wife and I felt like we were out on a limb. We had no satsang or sangha. We had no group of like-minded seekers with whom to speak on a regular basis, and we just wanted to find out if this is normal. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Not that we were not second-guessing any of our decisions. Let me give you an example of one of the decisions. When during the 1970s, my wife and I would go over to a friend's house, and it was during the time when Saturday Night Live television was really in its ascendance. Mm-hmm. And we had Belushi and Aykroyd, and they were heady times. Mm-hmm. And we would go over to these friends' home, and we would eat too much. We would drink too much. I would have a hard time driving home safely. I'd get home, and we felt like we couldn't meditate because we were a little too inebriated, and we would go to sleep, and we had a hard time falling asleep because we had eaten too much, and the digestive process had not completed. We would get up, we would have a headache, and we didn't feel like meditating. And so at a certain point, we started asking each other, gee, why do we keep on doing this? Mm-hmm. We want to meditate more often. Why do we keep on seeing these people? Mm-hmm. And the only reason that we could come up with was we are a good influence on them. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, after hearing ourselves say that to one another and examining it, we realize that, well, that's not the truth.
Yeah, right.
We're not a good influence on them. In fact, they are an influence on us.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right? So at that point, we realized, relationships come for a reason, a season, or a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps the season of this relationship is over because they were not interested in meditation, although we were.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to say, goodbye to that relationship because they were not interested in the things that were important to us.
Mm-hmm. Completely. That's a very interesting point right there, because so many of us find ourselves in similar situations, and then to transform that concept of what's actually going on in that relationship as counterproductive and not meaningful. Very, very interesting point. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and so we study what was taught to us by Swami Rama through his books. We've never had a meditation class with him, but over the many years, from the mid-'70s through 1994 at that time, we practiced from this lineage, which is the oldest continuous spiritual and meditation lineage in the world. It is the origin of every religion. It is the origin of every meditation practice. It is a mantra-based meditation practice. Mantras are words or series of words containing the name of the Supreme Reality. A mantra is a perfect harmonic. We're taught by quantum physicists that the universe is a shimmering vibration, one holistic shimmering vibration of particles and molecules. There is no two, there is no three. These are all concepts that indicate that one has appeared 2 times, one has appeared 3 times, one has appeared 4 times. So it's really a holistic organism. And the mantra represents a perfect harmonic. Now, the aggregate harmonic of mind-body-sense complex contains perfection at its core, and yet is covered by ignorance, imperfection. Talk about fear, anger, selfish desires. And so what the mantra does, by giving my full, complete attention, it does several different things. First of all, it creates a one-pointed mind. You can learn to give your one-pointed attention to one object to the exclusion of everything else. That's really a very valuable skill in every relationship.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yep.
And by learning one-pointed attention, you automatically learn detachment, which means that when there's an interceding, uninvited thought that comes into your awareness, you can then create a space between the stimulus and the response. And now, in that space between stimulus and response, between you and this interceding thought, in that space between stimulus and response, is freedom. To redirect your attention from the stimulus to your conscience, to find out if this interceding thought warrants your attention. Now, in meditation, seated silent meditation, there's only one thought that you're to give your attention to, and that is the mantra. Now, this is for the sake of training the mind. Okay, so going in that only the mantra is to be given your attention to. And every time you listen to the mantra, it does 3 things. It generates love and fearlessness and strength. Now remember, this is all hearsay now, but if you practice it, you too will experience that. Mm-hmm. Every time you listen to the mantra, it generates love and fearlessness and strength. And when an interceding thought comes, it means you have a new relationship. Before you can go back to your mantra, you have to deal with this interceding thought. How are you going to do that? Well, you don't want to just push it away. That's not kind. You don't want to repress it. That's neurotic. So you have to base your outer action on your inner wisdom. You honor it, you witness it, you sacrifice it. You redirect your attention back to the mantra. That it reinforces your one-pointed attention. It reinforces the skill of detachment. It enables you to have an intimate relationship with your conscience, so you're accessing discriminative wisdom, and you're building willpower.
Well, forgive me for interrupting, because at that particular point, a question does come to mind, and I think others are probably thinking about it, because our audience is a very well-educated audience, and many of them already understand the principle of the mantra. And even the mantra was, I don't know if you were aware that it came up in the Wall Street Journal recently, that they had some scientific studies on the value of the mantra and words. Now, let me ask you this question, because this is a little bit of a perhaps too specific question, but do you, in your practice, is the mantra delivered to you by a person upline from you who helps you understand that this would be the phrase for you, or is this something that does come from within and you then embrace and carry, or how does that whole process of mantra realization take place?
It can happen both ways. So initially, I took my own mantra, and in the Heart and Science of Yoga book, we present mantras to people, to readers, mantras from all sorts of spiritual and religious traditions, and ask people to bring each one into their heart and see which feels best for them.
Interesting.
And it will help to a great extent. Now, if a student finds a certain affinity with a particular teacher, as I did with Swami Rama, then when the student is ready, the student can go to the teacher and ask for initiation, at which point the teacher has an entire science of mantras at his or her disposal. And like a physician, understanding what the illness is, a meditation master can prescribe a certain mantra to help that student where that student needs it most.
How long does that student need to be with the master for the master to achieve that understanding?
Well, if this is a teacher that you believe in, that you have faith in, you never lose that relationship. In fact, when Swami Rama passed in 1996, after we had gone to India, simply to, well, we knew at the time that he was dying. So we went to India to thank him and to wish him a bon voyage. But the relationship only grew stronger because this guru principle, this universal force of light that dispels darkness, can be in a person. It can come to us through a person, but it is not the person.
Yes, I understand.
The teacher is not the guru, although the teacher can be the messenger of the guru. And that's why I tell people that Elvis Presley is one of my most important gurus.
Well,
when I was 10 years old, I fell in love with Elvis Presley. When I was 20, I loved him. When I was 30, I loved him. When I was 40 and 50 and 60, I loved him. I love him today. And because I loved him, I gave him my attention. That's what love is. Love is attention. So when I gave him my attention all those years, I observed many things that he did in his life, many of which were in conflict with my inner guru. So the outer guru in the form of Elvis Presley came into my life to teach me what not to do. And I'm very grateful. Outer gurus can come into our lives to teach us what to do. That's why Jesus, speaking as the Christ, said, I am the way, I am the light. And so when mom and dad, you see, our major gurus when we're born, they too are teaching us both what to do and what not to do. Although, you see, we get very angry at mom or dad when they don't act like angels or gods. And we get very mad when they fall susceptible to their own fears and their own anger and their own desires. But really, mom and dad, too, are trying the best they can to model for us not only what to do, but what not to do. So that we don't have to touch every burner on the stove to know which is hot and which is not.
So how long did you spend in India then before he passed? Or did you weren't there when he passed?
We were there for a month.
Wow. That must have been unbelievable.
Well, it was okay. It was a great learning experience. It was a great learning experience. We went to say bon voyage, and we went to face our fears. Part of the journey was a trip into the high Himalayas on little donkeys, on paths that were no wider than a couple of feet, and that fell off into God knows where.
Ouch.
And so we went to face our fears. As it turned out, when we got to the state of Uttar Pradesh in the north, where Rishikesh is, there was a civil war going on. There were forces that were coming into that area that represented lumber and mining, and that was a very sacred area, a very strict religious area. It was an area where there was no alcohol and no meat, and yet the influences from the logging industries and mining industries brought all sorts of influences, and there was conflict, violence. And we were sequestered under house arrest during that period because there was armed violence. So even though we didn't face fear in the high Himalayas, we faced it right in our hotel room.
Interpersonal reality. Ouch.
That's right. Little did we know what we were going to face. In addition to that, there was a pneumonic plague that was going on at that time. At a certain point, I asked the fellow who had arranged for this seminar, we were going to study with Swami Rama, a final teaching. I said to him, gee, do you think the State Department knows that we're here? Very naive, right?
Yeah, right.
Here's this American kid, right?
I don't think so.
Now 50 years old. Do you think the State Department knows that we're here? No, I don't think so.
Yeah, right. Ouch. Again. Wow, reality keeps hitting you right in the head on that one.
That's right.
Well, I'm looking at our time. I am just so much enjoying this conversation, and I know our listeners are too. They're just like, oh, this is so valuable and so helpful. I mean, the issue is when you finish a conversation with an individual like yourself, it's imperative to read the book, because in the book you're going to be telling us you're going to be telling us not all, I shouldn't have used that categorical word, but you're going to be telling us some answers about how we can get there. I mean, I think the issue is finding a path to move down each one's own personal path, so they have some door open that can take them down the next steps that they have to take for themselves. And that's certainly true in this conversation with you and me, and I really appreciate it. And I think that's true for a lot of our listeners. I'll be very surprised if you don't see some very positive responses to your this. I don't even want to call it an episode. It's a conversation.
Well, it's been thoroughly enjoyable to me. I truly appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. It's very rewarding.
Well, I do too, and I think the next thing would be at some time in the future when it's convenient for you. I think it'd be really good to take it to the next practical step of the questions that's on a lot of people's mind. I think we obviously need to read the book and do the practice. But the next level is for the uninitiated in terms of how you meditate, what you do with meditation, what your expectations are. Other questions enter my mind, like there's the empty mind, and then there's also a guided imagery mind. And those are questions that come up about, having done some work with an inner advisor in the past, how that might fit in with meditation and how one would experience that sort of thing. So there are a lot of questions that come up. We could certainly have another conversation at some time down the road if it'd be okay.
Well, Chuck, in meditation, no experience is the correct experience.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so we won't look for that magic silver bullet then.
Oh, but the mind, see how the mind wants that?
Yeah.
It wants it so bad? Yeah. Just tell me what it is.
Yeah.
Get it? Give me the silver bullet so I can experience that.
We'll come back and we'll get it. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And then, once I get it, boy, every time I go sit down, I'm going to be looking for it. And if I don't find it, I'm going to be very upset.
Well, I think you've really convinced me I need a mantra. I got to figure out how to do that. And so I'm looking forward to reading your book to find some synchronization with the path that others have been down, whether it's the correct one or not. It all changes with life anyway. So the issue is, if it's transformational, it doesn't occur in a millisecond. It occurs over time. So.
Well, it's all a journey. It's all a journey.
So much so. Well, Leonard Perlmutter, the author of The Heart and Science of Yoga, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and we really appreciate it. This is going to be one that a lot of people are going to be listening to more than once, I can tell you that. Very interesting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thanks for listening to Core Brain Journal. We're working every day behind the scenes to bring you reports that connect research benches with those street trenches. Here we share the complexity of mind science because, as you know, details really do matter. One of the most pervasive, misunderstood challenges is how commonplace medications, like those written for ADHD, are used so regularly without clear guidelines. If you think you'd like more specifics, take a minute to download my 2-page PDF packed with video links and references on the absolute essentials of how to start ADHD medications. They're easily available at corebrainjournal.com/start. Thanks for listening. Do connect and stay tuned. Together we can make a difference.